It was a snowy winter in 1922. Victoria Gabriel lived on a remote Bavarian farmstead 43 miles outside of Munich, Germany. Her farm was named Hinterkaifeck. It was surrounded by dense forest and isolated from the world around it. Victoria was made a widower at the young age of 27. She was now 35, unmarried, and raising 2 small children. Clearly, her life had not turned out as she had once imagined. Not even close. After the death of her husband, Victoria's parents moved onto the farm in order to help maintain the land, buildings, and animals, while a live-in maid took care of the household and the young children. As it turned out, having her father living on the farm turned Victoria's world upside down, for more reasons than one. None of the 6 people living there would be alive to see the snow melt that spring. What in the hell happened on that farm that warranted the brutal killing of 4 adults, a 7-year-old girl, and a 2-year-old boy? The manner in which they all perished that wintry March night will keep you awake and thinking about this mystery for years. Welcome to the Solved Crimes podcast, where we present the most perplexing and unsolved crime mysteries of all time. In all seriousness, you may help solve a real crime. In this episode, we tell the haunting story of the Hinterkaifeck Massacre. It took place on the evening of March 31st, 1922. The people there met an utterly gruesome fate that has remained a constant fascination of law enforcement and crime junkies worldwide for over 102 years. Hinterkaifeck Farm was the home of 64-year-old Andreas Gruber, his 72-year-old wife, Kazilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, and her 2 young children, 7-year-old daughter, Kazilia, named after her grandmother, and little 2-year-old Joseph. Their newly hired maid, 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner, had started working on the farm on March 31st, the very day of the massacre. In fact, Maria's sister had escorted her there earlier that afternoon. She spent a little bit of time with Maria in her new home, met her new employer and her family, and then left. She was likely the last to see those people alive, with the exception of the person or persons who murdered them. While Hinterkaifeck was out of the direct sight of most villagers, the family living there was already infamous to locals and those living in surrounding townships. Andreas Gruber was an angry man who directed his angst-filled violence mostly at his wife, Kazilia. But that's not all that Andreas did on that farm. Victoria's late husband, Karl Gabriel, was reportedly killed in France during a World War I shell attack back in 1914. His body was never recovered. More on that later. Victoria's son, Joseph, was born in 1919, almost 6 years after Karl had supposedly perished in the war. Curiously, Victoria had given her son Karl's last name, possibly in an attempt to protect the boy. The incredibly disgusting truth was that Joseph's biological father was none other than Andreas Gruber, Victoria's own father. While there had been speculation that a local man, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, had fathered young Joseph, Andreas was actually caught in the act of violently raping his own daughter. No wonder he was universally disliked. The scandal was well documented in the village court. Andreas and Victoria were both convicted of incest. Andreas was sentenced to 1 year in jail, while Victoria was sentenced to 1 month. Old world thinking and old world justice. Villagers were accustomed to seeing each other in church every Sunday, where Victoria was known for her beautiful but understandably mournful singing voice. On that particular Sunday, April 2nd, no one from the Gruber or Gabriel family had been seen at church services. There was a reason. The horrific scene at Hinterkaifeck sat undiscovered for 5 days. Life at Hinterkaifeck appeared to go on as usual. Smoke from a lit fireplace could be seen billowing from the chimney each day, very normal during winter months. 2 coffee salesmen, Hans and Edward, arrived at the farmstead on Saturday, April 1st, to take a regularly scheduled order. No one answered their knocks at the door, and after briefly glancing around the property, they decided to leave. The mailman noticed that the farm's animals had been fed each day he delivered the mail. Nothing was out of the ordinary. He understood why the mail might not be retrieved for several of the more cold, snowy days. On Tuesday morning, April 4th, Albert Hoffner, a local mechanic, arrived to repair an engine. He didn't see any sign of the residents, only noises from the animals in the barn. At 3:30 p.m. on that same day, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, yes, that Lorenz Schlittenbauer, sent his 16-year-old son, Johann, and 9-year-old stepson, Joseph, to Hinterkaifeck to make contact with the family. He hadn't seen the family at church on Sunday, and he had heard that Victoria's daughter, Kazelia, hadn't been to school that week. The boys returned and reported not seeing anyone, so Lorenz headed to the farm himself, along with his friends, Jacob and Michael. After their knocks went unanswered, Lorenz reportedly pulled a key to the main house from his pocket and unlocked the door. Coming up, you'll hear how Lorenz having a key to the home caused quite a lot of speculation around town. Looking around the house, the men soon found little Joseph, who was likely asleep in his bassinet when he was murdered. The bloodied body of Maria, the new maid, was found in her bedchamber. See our Instagram feed for actual crime scene photos. In the barn, they found the lifeless bodies of Andreas, his wife Kazelia, and daughter Victoria. They were stacked on top of one another in the bloody hay. The younger Kazelia's lifeless body was eventually located beneath the adults' bodies. It was later determined that she had been alive after the attack. The stress of what she witnessed and experienced caused her to rip out clumps of her own hair before succumbing to her horrific wounds. Investigators found that she was still holding fistfuls of her own hair. What little Kazelia went through is truly unimaginable. The murderer or murderers had used what was called a mattock in those days to kill each person. Here in the US, the same weapon is commonly known as a pickaxe. it was a tool belonging to the family. One of the men present when the bodies were found was horrified by what he saw.
The sight was something out of a nightmare. Blood everywhere. The family just lying there as if the killer was in no hurry to leave.
The crime scene was disturbing, not just for its brutality, but for the evidence that the killer or killers had stayed on the farm for several days, helping themselves to food and drink in the residence. While enjoying these comforts, they were surrounded by the slain corpses of 6 former human beings. On April 5th, 1922, Dr. Johann Aumler conducted autopsies on the victims.
The victims all died from blunt force trauma to the head. There were also strangulation marks found on the older Kazilia's neck. The younger Kazilia likely took hours to die, trapped under her family's bodies. She had several bald patches on her scalp, where she had likely removed hair from her head. I suspect she died from a combination of her injuries and pure shock.
Shortly before the murders, Andreas Gruber had confided to neighbors about some strange occurrences.
There are strange things happening around the farm. Footprints in the snow lead to the house, but none lead away.
Gruber and the previous maid had heard footsteps, even low voices, coming from the attic, but found nothing when they investigated. A set of keys went missing, and newspapers from Munich were discovered in the home. Andreas had talked to the mailman, who confirmed that he did not deliver any such newspaper. Despite these unsettling events, the family did not leave the farm or seek help. Andreas was said to have refused a neighbor's offer to loan him a firearm. Those decisions would prove fatal. The nearest police station was 45 miles away in Munich. By the time lead investigator George Reingruber and his team arrived, the initial investigation faced significant challenges. The crime scene was compromised as neighbors and townspeople, unaware of forensic protocols, moved bodies and even cleaned up some areas of the house. They thought they were helping. Dozens of people had walked through the property by the time police arrived, destroying vital evidence. Evidence that could very well have aided law enforcement in determining who was responsible for these brutal murders. Was one of them the killer, hoping to erase proof of what he had done? Investigator Reinberger's initial impression was that money wasn't the killer's motivation.
The barn showed signs of a struggle, but no clear motive or suspect emerged. Money was found untouched, ruling out robbery.
Over 100 people were initially interviewed during the investigation. Many potential suspects were looked at, but no arrests were ever made. Less than a year after the murders and investigation, Hinterkaifeck was completely destroyed. It was at that time that the mattock used in the murders was discovered hidden in the attic of the home. All that remains today is a small shrine that stands alongside an open field and in close proximity to the crime scene. The inscription reads, "On March 31, 1992, the godless hand of a murderer claimed the lives of the Gabriel Gruber family from here." It also lists the names and birth years of the victims. As with any murder mystery, everyone seemed to have a theory, or two, as to the identity of the killer or killers. Some of them were pretty out there. Over the past century, there have been suspected killers with names like the Gump brothers, Peter Weber, the Bischler brothers, George Siegel, and the Thaler brothers. One of the more interesting theories was that the real murderer was the late Carl Gabriel himself. After the massacre, some began to wonder if Carl had really died in the war, considering his body was never recovered. Some even claimed to have seen him during World War II. Neighbor Lorenz Schlittenbauer was initially a suspect due to his bizarre behavior and past romantic involvement with Victoria. Many quickly drew the conclusion that he had been the one who swiped the keys from the house before the massacre. When asked why he initially entered the home, Lorenz reportedly said that he went looking for his son, Joseph, although there is no proof that he fathered the boy. For many years, local speculation was firmly aimed at Schlittenbauer for many reasons, including his odd behavior and bizarre comments he had made after the murders. In 1925, he was discovered visiting the remains of Hinterkaifeck. One rumor was that Lorenz murdered the family after Victoria demanded money to support young Joseph. Before his death in 1941, Schlittenbauer sued several people for slander and won civil suits against those who constantly named him the murderer of Hinterkaifeck. There were many other suspects bantered about the folklore following the murders at Hinterkaifeck. Read about several of them on the official Hinterkaifeck Murders Wikipedia page, linked here in the description. In the centuries since this crime occurred, there have been many news and magazine articles, books, stage plays, radio shows, documentary films, and of course, a gazillion YouTube videos. In 2007, 15 Police Academy students from the Police University of Applied Sciences in Bavaria used modern investigation techniques in an attempt to solve the Hinterkaifeck case. While they could not forensically prove who committed the murders, all 15 students agreed on who they believe is the likely murderer in their final report on the case. All the students would divulge in the report was that the crime was triggered by a personal emotional conflict. Well, duh. The group decided not to name this person in the report out of consideration of the person's descendants. Okay, of course that's very nice of them, but the fact is this case has been on the world's stage for over a century. They couldn't have anonymously leaked it on social media or something? Ultimately, the way the original crime scene was handled, the lack of modern crime scene protocols, the destruction of the property, and the passing of over 100 years, there is next to no chance of collecting any usable DNA evidence. German crime reporter Oliver Bendixen.
Hinterkaifeck is a perfect storm of horror and mystery. A remote farm, a gruesome mass murder, and an investigation that raises more questions than it answers.
Here's an interesting theory on the case. In their 2017 book, The Man from the Train, Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James offer the possibility of a known serial killer being responsible for the Hinterkaifeck Massacre. They examine known serial killer Paul Mueller, who is believed to have killed several families here in the United States between 1898 and 1912. Murders attributed to Mueller include the Villisca axe murders that took place in June 1912 in the town of Villisca, Iowa. 6 members of the Moore family and their 2 house guests, including 6 children, suffered severe head wounds from an axe. The authors admit that the chances of Mueller being the Hinterkaifeck killer are more or less a toss-up, saying that there's no real reason to believe that it's not him. The Hinterkaifeck Massacre is yet another terrible reminder of how much we still don't understand about the darker sides of the human psyche. If you have any theories or insights into this case, or if there's a case you think we should look into, we would love to hear from you. For more resources on the Hinterkaifeck Massacre, links are provided in this episode's description. Be sure to visit our Instagram page for actual crime scene photos from Hinterkaifeck. Join us again as we delve into other perplexing mysteries.